My younger brother drained every dollar from my savings account, and when I told my dad, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Just ignore it, you have plenty," so I made sure every single one of them understood what plenty actually means. The balance was $4.11. I looked at it on my phone screen standing in a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon with a cart full of food I could no longer pay for. I looked at it 3 times. The number did not change. $4.11 in an account that had held $47,000 the previous Thursday when I had checked it last. I stood next to the cart in the parking lot and felt the specific cold of something that has not yet become real. My name is Cicely. 34 years old. The $47,000 had taken me 6 years to save. Not inherited. Not gifted. Built from a salary that required discipline to save from, and from 3 years of freelance work I had taken on top of my full-time job on evenings and weekends, the specific grinding accumulation of someone who understood that the number in the account was the difference between having options and not having them. My brother Dean was 28. He had access to my account because 2 years earlier our mother had a medical crisis, and I had added him as an emergency contact on my banking profile in case something happened to me during the chaos of those weeks and someone needed access to funds for her care. The crisis passed. I had forgotten to remove him. Dean had apparently not forgotten he was there. I left the cart in the parking lot. I sat in my car. I called the bank. The representative spoke in the careful, measured tone of someone delivering information they have delivered before. 41 transactions over 9 days. The earliest dated the previous Tuesday. Transfers, withdrawals, 3 large purchases at electronics retailers, 1 at a car dealership I recognized as being 2 miles from Dean's apartment. The account had been emptied methodically, not all at once, in amounts that stayed below the threshold that would have triggered an automatic alert. I sat in the car for a long time after the call ended. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. I could hear the television behind him, the specific afternoon programming he watched every day at that hour. I told him what had happened. The account. The $47,000. Dean's name on every transaction. I gave him every number the bank representative had given me. I spoke clearly and without crying because I had decided in the car that I was going to be precise and I was going to let the precision do the work. My father was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he said, "Just ignore it, Cicely. You have plenty." I held the phone. The television kept going behind him. I said, "Dad." He took $47,000. He said, "You are doing well. You can rebuild. Dean is going through a difficult time and he made a mistake and I need you to let this go for the sake of the family." I said, "He did not make a mistake. He made 41 transactions over 9 days." My father said, "Cicely." The specific tone he had used my entire life to signal that a conversation was being closed. "You have plenty. Let it go." He ended the call. I sat in the parking lot of the grocery store with $4.11 in my account and the groceries still in the cart and my father's voice in my ear telling me I had plenty. I need to tell you about my family before I tell you what I did next. My father's name is Roland. 66 years old. He had built a small but stable business over 30 years and had retired comfortably and lived in the house I grew up in with the same furniture and the same television programming and the same fundamental belief that the family operated as a unit in which certain members were load-bearing and certain members required support and that this arrangement was natural and required no examination. Dean was the youngest child and the only son and had occupied the supported position since birth with the specific ease of someone who has never been asked to examine the arrangement either. I was the oldest. I had left home at 18 and had not required anything from my parents since. I had sent money home twice, once when my mother's car needed replacing and once during the medical crisis, and had done so without being asked and without it being acknowledged as anything beyond expected. I had built my savings on the assumption that they were mine, that they existed in a separate space from the family's general sense of what belonged to whom, that the 6 years of evenings and weekends and discipline had produced something that was inviolably my own. Dean had apparently not shared this assumption. I drove home. I made a list. Not an emotional list. A practical one, in the specific way of someone who has decided that precision is the only tool available to them right now. I wrote down every number. Every transaction date. The car dealership. The electronics retailers. The total. I wrote down what the bank had told me about recovery options and FR-UT claims and the specific circumstances under which a claim could be filed against an authorized account contact. I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name was Sandra and she had handled my lease agreements and a contract dispute 2 years earlier and she picked up and listened to everything I said without interrupting and when I finished she said, "The authorized contact designation does not grant withdrawal rights. What Dean did is not a gray area," she said. "File the police report today. Come to my office tomorrow." I filed a police report that afternoon. I did not call my father first. I did not call Dean. I drove to the police station and I sat across from an officer, and I gave him every number on my list, and I watched him type and I answered every question with the precision I had decided on in the grocery store parking lot. Dean called me that evening. His voice had the quality of someone who has been told something is happening and is calling to assess the situation before deciding how to respond to it. He said, "Cicely, Dad said you were upset about some money stuff. Can we talk about this?" I said, "There is a police report filed with your name on it. Talk to a lawyer." I ended the call. My father called 20 minutes later. His voice had lost the afternoon television quality entirely. He said, "You filed a police report against your brother." I said yes. He said, "Cicely, this is a family matter." I said, $47,000 and 41 transactions is a police matter." He said, "I told you to let it go." I said, "You told me I had plenty." He said, "You are going to destroy this family over money." I said, "Dean destroyed something over money. I'm just making sure it is documented." He said my name in the closing tone. I said, "I will not be reachable for a while, Dad. Talk to your lawyer." I ended the call. I sat in my apartment in the quiet and I looked at the list on the table and I looked at my phone and I looked at the wall and I thought about 6 years of evenings and weekends, and the specific discipline of building something from nothing, and I thought about 41 transactions over 9 days, and I thought about "You have plenty" said with the television going in the background. Then I opened my laptop and I started making the other calls. The ones that had nothing to do with the police report. The ones that were about what plenty actually meant and what happened when someone decided that someone else's plenty was available for general use. My father had 3 business accounts at the same bank I used. I knew this because I had helped him set up the online banking 4 years ago when he transitioned out of paper statements and had walked him through the portal over 2 phone calls on a Sunday afternoon. I still had the login information he had asked me to write down for him in case he forgot. I opened a document. I started writing down everything I knew about my father's financial arrangements. Not to take anything. To understand what was available to me as leverage in a conversation that my father had decided was already closed. The document grew. I saved it. I closed the laptop. I went to Sandra's office the next morning with my list and my document and 6 years of someone who had learned that precision was the only thing that held when everything else was being dismissed as something you had plenty of. "Sandra, read everything." She looked up. She said, "You are prepared." I said, "I had a long drive home from the grocery store." She said, "Let me show you what we can do with this." Sandra filed the civil claim the following week. Concurrent with a police report, separate track, designed to move at its own pace regardless of what the criminal process did or did not produce. She explained the strategy over 2 hours at her office with documents on the table between us, and I listened with the attention of someone who had decided that understanding every detail was the only form of control available to them. Dean hired a lawyer within 48 hours of the civil filing. I know this because Sandra received a communication from his representation before the end of the week. She called me and said, "He is taking it seriously now." I said, "He should have taken it seriously before he spent $47,000 that did not belong to him." She said, "Yes. But seriously now is what produces outcomes." My father called 3 times in the first week after the filing. I let each call go to voicemail and listened to them in order that evening. The first was the closing tone, compressed into a message, the word family used 4 times. The second was different, something underneath the tone that I had not heard from him before, a quality that lived adjacent to worry. The third was the shortest. He said, "Call me back, Cicely. Please." I saved all 3. I did not call back. My mother called on the 4th day. She had been present in the background of the situation in the specific way she occupied the background of most situations involving Dean and my father, aware and quiet, managing her own understanding of events in private. She said, "I want to talk to you without your father." I said, "Okay." She said, "What Dean did was wrong. I want to say that to you directly." I said, "I know." She said, "Your father's response was also wrong." I said, "I know." She said, "I have been sitting with both of those things for 4 days and I do not know what to do with them except to call you and say them out loud." I said, "That is enough for right now." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I will be." She said, "I am sorry, Cicely." I said, "I know, Mom." We talked for 40 minutes. About things that had nothing to do with the account or Dean or the filing. About her garden and a book she had been reading and the specific quality of the October light through her kitchen window in the mornings. When we hung up, I sat in my apartment and felt something that had been entirely absent since the grocery store parking lot, which was the specific warmth of being seen by someone who was not performing it. The document I had built the night I came home from Sandra's first meeting had grown across the following weeks. Not through anything I had taken or accessed without permission. Through information I already had, Login details my father had asked me to write down on a Sunday afternoon 4 years ago because he was worried about forgetting them, documents I had helped him organize during the retirement transition, communications I had been copied on because he trusted my judgment on financial matters and had said so directly more than once. I had not used any of it yet. I was waiting to understand whether I would need to. The answer came at the end of the third week when Dean's lawyers sent a communication through Sandra suggesting that the withdrawn funds had been a loan, that there had been an understanding between Dean and myself, that the characterization of the transactions as unauthorized was a misrepresentation of a family financial arrangement. I read Sandra's summary of the communication sitting at my kitchen table with coffee. Alone. 41 transactions over 9 days at electronics retailers and a car dealership constituted, according to Dean's lawyer, a loan that had been mutually understood. I called Sandra. I said, "The document," she said, "tell me what is in it." I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Send it to me today." I sent it that afternoon. What the document contained was not dramatic. It was methodical. 3 years of my father's business account activity that I had access to through the login information he had given me, organized into a clear picture of a pattern of transfers between his business accounts and Dean's personal account. Not large amounts individually. Consistent. Monthly. Undisclosed to the IRS, and the characterization that had been applied to them in the business filings I had helped my father organize during the retirement transition. Sandra looked at it for 2 days. She called me on the third. She said, "This changes the conversation significantly," she said, "not because of what it means for your case specifically. Because of what it means for your father's position in this situation," she said. "He told you to ignore it because you have plenty. He said that because he understood that pursuing Dean would create proximity to something he needed to stay distant from." I sat with that for a long time. My father called the following morning. Not from the house phone. From his cell, which he used for calls he did not want my mother to be adjacent to. He said, "I need to meet with you." I said, "Have your lawyer call Sandra." He said, "Cicely, this has gone far enough." I said, "It went far enough when you told me I had plenty." Ended the call. He said, "I need you to understand the position you are putting this family in." I said, "Dean put this family in a position. I'm just making sure everyone understands what that means." He said, "There are things that could be complicated by what you are doing." I said, "I know." He was quiet. I said, "Have your lawyer call Sandra." The meeting happened the following week. Sandra's office. My father and his lawyer on one side of the table. Sandra and me on the other. My father looked older than he had the last time I had seen him, which had been at my mother's birthday dinner 3 months earlier. He sat with his hands on the table and he looked at me, and I looked back, and the room was very quiet before anyone spoke. The outcome of that meeting took 3 weeks to finalize. I am not going to detail every term because some of it is still legally sensitive. The summary is this. Dean repaid the full amount. Not all at once. On a structured timeline with legal enforceability that Sandra had built into the agreement, with the specific attention of someone who understood that the goodwill of people who had already demonstrated their approach to other people's money was not a reliable enforcement mechanism. My father's financial arrangements were not part of the legal proceeding. They did not need to be. Their existence in the document was sufficient. Everyone in that room understood what sufficient meant. My father said one thing to me directly before we left Sandra's office. He said, "I handled this wrong." I looked at him. He said, "I told you to ignore it." I should not have said that. I said, "No," he said, "I was protecting something I should not have been protecting at your expense." I said, "Yes," he said, "I am sorry, Cicely." I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "I know." We walked out of Sandra's office into the afternoon and went to our separate cars, and I drove home and sat in my apartment and looked at the wall for a while. My mother called that evening. She said, "Your father told me what he said in the meeting." I said, "Okay." She said, "He has not said that to many people in his life. I want you to know that." I said, "I know." She said, "What happens now?" I said, "Now Dean repays the money and I rebuild what the 6 years built, and we find out what the family looks like on the other side of this." She said, "What does it look like?" I said, "I do not know yet. But it starts with nobody telling me I have plenty when someone takes what is mine." She said, "That was wrong, Cicely." "What he said was wrong." I said, "I know." She said, "He knows it too." I said, "Good. That is where we start." Dean and I have not spoken directly since the night I told him to talk to a lawyer. That is not a permanent arrangement. It is simply where we are, which is at the beginning of a very long road that requires more from him than a structured repayment before it becomes something else. He is making the payments. On schedule. The first 3 have arrived exactly when the agreement specified. I received the notification from Sandra's office, and I noted, and I go about the rest of the day. The savings account has been rebuilt. Not to 47,000 yet. It will get there. 6 years built it the first time, and I am not starting from the same place I started then, which is from nothing. I am starting from the specific knowledge of what I am building and why and what happens to it when I am not paying attention, which means I am paying attention now in ways I was not before, and that kind of attention compounds. My father and I have dinner with my mother once a month. The first dinner was uncomfortable in the specific way of people who have been in a room with truth and are still learning to be in the same room as each other with it present. The third dinner was easier. The fifth was the first one where something that had not been in the room before appeared, something small and careful, the beginning of a different kind of conversation than the ones we had been having for most of my adult life, the ones where I was capable and he was paternal and Dean was the youngest and the arrangement required no examination. The arrangement is being examined now. By all of us. Slowly and imperfectly and without the certainty that it produces anything clean on the other side. But examined. I sat in that grocery store parking lot with $4.11 in the card I could not pay for and the phone in my hand, and I understood something that took me the rest of the day to put into words. The $47,000 was not the thing that had been taken. The $47,000 was evidence of the thing that had been taken, which was the understanding within my family that what I built was mine and not available for general distribution based on someone else's assessment of how much I could afford to lose. "You have plenty," said with the television going. Said to end a conversation that my father had decided was already over. The conversation was not over. It lasted 3 weeks in Sandra's office and one meeting with lawyers on both sides of a table and one sentence from my father in a parking lot afterward that cost him more than the words themselves suggested. Know what is yours. Document it. Build it carefully. And the moment someone tells you that you have plenty and looks away, understand that they are not describing your abundance. They are describing their assumption that your abundance is available to them. It is not available. It was never available. Make sure they understand what plenty actually means. Starting with what it costs to take it.